This is Navigating Cyber Risk podcast with me, John Riley and George Usi as your hosts. Join us as we explore the challenges faced by executives as they grapple with new and ever-changing cybersecurity mandates. Welcome to another episode of Navigating Cyber Risk with your host, George Usi, and I'm John Riley. Today we have this awesome guest who's been practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for over 8 years. He leads a balanced work life with his 3 children, and he can be found with his sons and daughters' troops as a scoutmaster. He's a retired Special Forces officer in the Army, and he's the president of PingWind. Welcome to Clarence Dingman.
Great to be here.
Great to have you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got, we're going to start off here with, some the tough questions.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you explain the difference between what cybersecurity is and what cyber risk is?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sean. Well, I agree with you. I think it's important that we distinguish between cybersecurity and cyber risk. They're interconnected, but they're definitely not the same thing. Cybersecurity to me is more about preventing cyber attacks from happening, whereas cyber risks are the dangers we face today as technologies continue to become, even more interconnected. These risks can be broken out in a couple of ways: categories in which they harm your business, your clients, or your ecosystem. You look at things like operational, financial, growth, and personnel. Intent, malicious, you've got a disgruntled employee, data stealing, ransoming, or, things that could result in the partial total destruction of your business. Or ignorance, software license or antivirus software expiration. I know that sounds really simple and mundane, but these are, potentially unforeseen risks in systems. You've got systems integration, and that's becoming even more important as we become more interconnected, as well as the means of delivery. So, things like malware, supply chain, human factors, and social engineering. Cyber risks can also present themselves based on an organization's dependencies. If we depend on one system exclusively for a function and have no backups to that around that present a significant risk to your business. To me, cybersecurity, however, it's generally the system of protective measures that you put in place to hopefully avoid, or if you have to, mitigate the impact or probability of these risks as we look at things like your organization and your system dependencies. I don't think any one or any combination of cybersecurity measures is ever 100% foolproof. But if you put measures in place, you have to look at your cost to benefit and how secure do you want your system to be, and that's really based on what the level of importance is for you or your business.
Well, and I think that cyber risk is very similar in the fact that you can never reduce your cyber risk to zero. Right?
Exactly.
As long as you're connected to the internet, as long as you have employees, your cyber risk can never be zero. Just like you can never be 100% secure from a cybersecurity standpoint. So that was a great explanation.
Yeah. And I think, John, to that point, you have to look at your data half-life, right? So look at, when does that data that you're trying to protect, or that thing that you're trying to protect lose its value or depreciate to the point where it's not necessary to have, those stringent measures in place. Because, as we all know, cybersecurity is not inexpensive either. So you have to look at that and say, okay, well, if my data half-life goes out beyond a certain number of years, maybe I can re-examine the measures that I have in place.
I often find and wonder if you see the same thing too. A lot of let's just call them non-technical executives who really grapple with the concept of understanding what it is that they're leading, because they're not super familiar with technology. And that is I think one of the best ways to define cyber risk for executives is that, just like you would help any other department, you want to make sure that things stay safe within your organization. So with HR, you're keeping the building safe. Maybe you have security guards if you're, working in an office. But it kind of depends on where you're at in terms of your leadership style as well. So if you're going to be able to address risk in general, this falls into that bucket. The cyber risk component is more business oriented in the decisions that you make, especially for the CFO who's saying yes or no to a budget.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, George, to that point, it goes to, even if you're not a technical executive, you have to have some degree of awareness in terms of cyber risk and cybersecurity, what these things are, what the tools that are available. And I think the philosophical stance that your business has around its data and what's important and what's not, or the degrees of importance, I should say. It's not necessarily a black and white thing.
So what would you say is the most important thing that executive that is there? What would be the most significant threat that they would be facing? And what's the top three for you? I mean, what are the focus there?
Well, I think, for me, and you highlighted a little bit about my background before, coming from Special Forces, coming from the Army. I always go back to one component, and that's the human factor. I firmly believe that the human factor plays the most critical role in any type of cyber threat. But I think, especially in the last year or so, there's probably an asterisk to that, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But I learned when I was in the Army, humans are far more important than hardware. And a similar mindset applies, I think, to cybersecurity threats. Humans are the most dynamic element of a given scenario. We can trust our tools to operate as they're predicted to operate. You got system pushes data from B to C, scans and validates in D and E, and then it's distributed to its end users. A human, however, might unintentionally click on a link disguised as a legitimate communication. And then now that one click has opened the door to access across your network. Human might have poor cyber hygiene. They might have weak passwords that they don't frequently update, or you might not use something called multi-factor authentication, just a fancy way that says I get a text on my phone when I try to log into something. It's another means of securing yourself and validating your identity as you're trying to get access. Human or a team of humans may not consider data exposure, and I think George had alluded to that earlier with your HR data, and there's health and HIPAA concerns with that as well. Human might forget to disable certain functions, and you see this in as a risk in small and emerging businesses where everybody's got access, everybody's has admin access to machines when you first start, and then as you evolve, those permissions really need to be taken into consideration. Same thing, my work, I deal with a lot of data surplus. So there's old data that may not be configured in the most recent or relevant cybersecurity protocol. And that in and of itself, that data pool is a risk. So I think there's a lot of things that can always be traced back to the human factor, but there is an asterisk, and that asterisk is AI. Inclusion and proliferation of AI, especially over the last year, even last several months with ChatGPT and things of that nature, and AI being used by bad actors for malicious and nefarious actions. Human factor has always been a threat, but I think that AI is still an element that is presenting a scenario that we're not fully prepared to deal with adequately as an industry. As you see these intelligent bots keep pushing theft and identity attacks.
Yeah. Even deep fakes and being able to authenticate via voice or things like that. I mean, we're definitely going to have some issues with how that works. I mean, we consider biometrics, right? But I mean, I don't know if we've actually considered the voice recognition and some of those things.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure you saw that. I don't remember where I read it, but where AI had convinced a human operator that it was a disabled human and could not see a CAPTCHA, and the human let them in.
Yep, I did see that. AI is definitely a new thing, and we'll definitely need some training. How's that?
Yeah, training for sure. And I also think if you're looking at AI as a nefarious actor, you also have to consider its benefit as well. And training and helping AI to evolve to recognize threats that a human might not recognize. I think is something we also might want to consider.
I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. This triggers a little bit of history in my mind of there was a time when there was no internet in businesses, and it came along, and let's just say that there were a lot of people in technology that were concerned about what essentially was going to happen when you start going online.
Mm-hmm.
I think the 90s timeframe was that time. And I think that's that issue of artificial intelligence. That is kind of the next concept where people are saying, should I use it? Should I go online? Should I not? Hey, should I use AI? Should I not? So those topics are stewing. And obviously in cyber risk arenas, if the AI is essentially utilized by the hacking community, we've seen happening already. It further enhances the idea that getting compromised is a matter of when. So are you prepared for when it happens? Do your best to protect, but add that addition,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And so that really is the challenge, I think. That
I agree with you, George. And I think, it goes back to what I was saying before, where you consider, this is like an isotope or an element. You've got a half-life, and your data's value decays, over time, and it's on the executive and the executive team to kind of figure out, okay, what is that half-life rate, and where do I invest?
Absolutely. And I think what leaders need to be aware of is that although data does have a half-life, like let's say personal information to address somebody, they move, right? And so they're no longer in a specific area or in a specific state. So here's an example of the half-life of, address information, even,
right?
Individual, which is considered, legally protected in some states now. So, and that's what you have to look at, I think, that's the missing piece. It's great that we're trying to stop that hacker, but what about the regulations?
Yep.
So if it doesn't have the data doesn't have a half-life, then look to the regulations, because that's what will tell you what the half-life has to be.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And that in and of itself becomes increasingly more complex. The industry that I work in with the Department of Defense have these things called security technical implementation guides, or STIGs, that you have to check against, if you have a new protocol, or you go to that earlier point of, an old data pool, you have to make sure they're up to the most recent STIG guidance. And, I've got teams that are making just decision ready recommendations every day of like, okay, well, this is, a certain degree of red flag that we need to address immediately. This is less of a degree of red flag, and here's why. And these are the types of recommendations that we're making to DoD on a daily basis.
Yeah. Basically, these security technical implementation guides, are also tied to other things that your technical team might deal with. And so I know we tend to flaunt a lot of what we call, or what I call, TLA, so 3-letter acronym.
Yep.
4 and there's 5, and I think
that's right.
That's the challenge is that you do expect as a leader for others to have that competency, and I think too often the concept of a regulation that this must be it deals with something with a blinking light, so as an executive we're going to look at that and say, the technical guide. But what's happening in areas of cyber risk is they don't. And so they have to kind of school themselves.
Right.
And then you start to deal with that question of, well, wait a second, who's responsible for understanding risk that's not technical, right? And I think that's always the challenge in this idea of not just the half-life of data, but what other things is the organization struggling with? And so you really have to look to outside helpers, to understand those ideas. But, as you build your teams as executives, I'm sure there's struggles there as well, because how do you find those people? And I think for me, the biggest eye-opening moment I had just recently was I attended a conference, conference called RSA conference.
Yep.
And one of the speakers was the prior CISO, Chief Information Security Officer of cars.com. He was no longer a CISO. He went back to school and got his JD, and now is a practicing attorney. Such a huge gap in that area of understanding the regulatory. And so that, straddling the fence is a lot more than just the idea of stopping the hacker and understanding the TLAs
Absolutely.
And not only the technical people are the ones that exclusively understand the right people to help.
Well, I think you can add to that, not necessarily, to that earlier point you had, George, of finding the right team. But I think it goes beyond that, because, as you see things continuously evolve, it's training and it's educating your team as they grow. When I look at especially strategic hires that are coming to my organization, I'm looking at their personality, I'm looking at their soft skills, probably more so than anything else. And one of the things that is always in the back of my head is this person open to new ideas? Is this person trainable? If we have things like this pop up where cybersecurity is becoming exponentially more important to the continuity of your business and your ability to grow. So as that becomes more prominent, we have to evolve as well. We have to there's trainings that you can take. There's additional certifications, and you have to look at that kind of across the organization, from those who are on your client site day to day to your corporate staff. And what level of training makes sense for them.
I think the world's also changed a little bit with outsourced application providers, that the SaaS applications, mm-hmm. As George said, that everything with a blinking light. Well, there's a lot less blinking lights that are happening within an organization these days, and it's more about the data and the transference of that mm-hmm. data, how to integrate that data between service providers.
Yep.
And so it's a different skill set than what it was 5-10 years ago.
Absolutely.
And I think that executives have to take a look at that and understand what data they're tracking and is it needed, and all the other pieces that go around that.
Mm-hmm.
So along with that, there's a two-part question here, but how should a CEO prioritize that cyber risk, and then how does the CFO budget for that? What kind of cyber risk budgets should be set?
Yeah. So, I'll talk a little bit about the prioritization of risk, and it's certainly something, that I'm doing, in my role, is making sure that, the attitude of myself and other senior leaders within the organization, sets that baseline, that focus, of cybersecurity, I think first and foremost, you have to understand the cyber risks that are facing the organization so that we can prioritize our efforts, to integrate cybersecurity into everything that we do, and to what extent. It's not just a black or white; it's a gradient, right? So we have to be looking at it from a gradient perspective. For me, I think it's important that CEOs and senior leaders, establish an organizational stance to specific project or programs or elements of their business. And also listen to trusted members of their enterprise to tailor the cyber risk responses. This is where things like subject matter experts like a CTO or CISO come into play here. But having those both internal and external resources to consult with to build your strategy. Because 3 years ago I knew absolutely nothing about cybersecurity to the extent that I do today, right? So I'm still expected to, perform, still expected to, have, compliance with certain standards, and still expected to maintain a cybersecurity posture. So the way I was able to do that, and it's been through, consulting subject matter experts in that area. And I know enough to be dangerous, and usually just to myself at this point. But that being said, it's very important that a CEO considers that inner organization, so that we can align our enterprise level goals with taking cybersecurity into consideration. And that could be everything from prioritizing organizational health, to taking care of people where they're at. Avoiding, or reducing the chance for cyber risk through disgruntled employees or malicious intent. Operating from a high ethical standard, I think, is another thing you need to look at. If you're seen as a good entity within the business community, you're less likely, and you're never, to go to our earlier point, you're never 0% likely of a cyber attack, but you want to try to reduce, likely sources, right? So investing in resources is another thing that we can look at. I think that it's something that we've looked at in my organization, recruiting and retaining those IT subject matter experts, and prioritizing different initiatives and taking ownership of them. So having this is this second small business that I've worked at, my post-Army career, where we've evolved as an organization and taken rightful steps as we've kind of scaled. So in each of those organizations, the initiatives that have done well with regard to cybersecurity have had the executive support that they need, and in those that have kind of floundered and maybe had to be re-examined, were those that weren't necessarily on the radar of the CEO or the owner of the company at the time. So I think that those are some of the main things with regards to the CEO. But for the CFO, some may believe, and I think we've kind of teased it out, in the course of our discussion here, that this isn't true. But some might believe that the CFO doesn't play much of a role in cybersecurity, and I would 100% disagree with that. The CFO needs to be involved in setting the policy for data protection, as well as internal controls, because some of the most protected information inside of the company falls under the CFO's purview. And for us, in the world that I come from, that's our pricing, that's our billing information, those are our clients. So that there's a lot of very important information specific to the CFO that needs to be protected from cybersecurity. So when we're looking at whether it's the half-life of data or the fact that something must be protected throughout its entire life, the CFO plays a key role in approving or otherwise suggesting potential solutions to protect their own disparate pool data. So it's both a technical and a financial role, I think.
Well, and I think something that you said there was absolutely spot on as far as the budget. You didn't say it this way, but I'm going to clarify a little.
Yeah.
So as far as the budgeting goes, it's not necessarily a dollar amount that has to be budgeted. It's an executive time amount that has to be budgeted, because that's what really regulates the success of a project and the company mindset moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you start talking about the budget specifically, we look at things in kind of 1, 3, and 5 year roadmaps. That's the roadmap is if everything goes well, and you got things kind of moderate, then if everything goes poorly. So you've got those three potential courses that you could find yourself on, and in each of those, I think it's incumbent on the CFO who's working, with that subject matter expert in the CISO or the CTO and the CEO. I think it's incumbent on the CFO to build out risk pools for those different courses on that roadmap. Because obviously if things are going poorly, our risk pool may not be as big, so we may need to look at all alternate options. But if it's going well, okay, well now we're more of a target for our competitors or potentially threat actors with regards to cyber attacks. So how do we bolster our cybersecurity, and what are the pools that we're going to be pulling from, for those additional platforms, trainings, or architecture that we're going to put in place.
Yeah, well said. I understand that the biggest challenge for many executives, and I've heard it over and over again, how the heck do I do this? I'm not technically competent, so what am I supposed to? I have to delegate it, right? So, and I think that's all of these things that we're talking about in cyber risk, become almost a sort of a re-educational plan for executives, or possibly the call it for essentially is moving on to something that's more their style, depending upon where their sweet spot is. Yeah. And I think that's what lawmakers are doing with a lot of the legislation, especially in kind of the omnibus data privacy laws that of hitting the ground running state by state. It's there's definitely some traction right now with a federal privacy law, but I think that's the piece that the executives are now paying attention to it because they realize, oh, wait a second,
Yeah.
this is a risk.
Think back to my time in the military where you can say, you can delegate responsibility, but not authority. And, in my opinion, the CEO, whether they're technical or not, and, I certainly, on my best day, I'm probably moderately technical. So, I try to surround myself with people who are very technical, and then just asking, operationally and strategic related questions to help inform a decision that ultimately I'm going to make. But I want to enter into that decision with a full appreciation for either the risk that I'm assuming or the risk that I'm avoiding.
Yeah, I think that as an executive, I do wonder if there's a lesson to be learned, at least in reading, and how do you deal with cyber risk? And I don't know if you've read the book "Turn the Ship Around" by David Marquette.
No, I've not. It's a good recommendation.
But just for our listeners, basically, this is a book about if you don't know what you're doing, right? Take an example from this book, which is about a submarine captain is charged with basically leading a vessel that he had zero training. Mm-hmm. Trained on the wrong vessel for like a year and a half straight. And all of a sudden, he's assigned to this particular vessel that had poor reenlistment stats, which, is a problem if you're familiar with at least that part of the Navy. Long story short is it talks about a different leadership style that he used, and he turned the ship around. He went from poor performing to exceptional. And so even if you don't know, there is a leadership method that you can at least embrace as you delegate, because you also have to be qualified enough to know whether your leaders, especially in the CEO or at the board level, to make sure that they understand, that what it is that they're doing. And if you're not familiar with it, don't be afraid. Consider a different potential leadership style, at least in the area of anything light, as we like to say.
Yes.
So, generally, we're the one asking you about the book, so I apologize. I jump in. I know John, will smirk a little bit when I bring a book up. But at least for our listeners, I know that it's always a challenge to understand, how do I lead something that that's been just not my thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
pretty much.
No, I think both of you hit the nail on the head. And then, before it is, to a large extent that personality driven and soft skill driven, are you willing to accept counsel? Are you willing to accept additional training and progress inside of an organization? And then once you're in that position, you're never going to have all the answers. And especially if there's something new that's evolving, how good are you at selecting individuals to be part of that, that cadre of advisors, who are going to help you make, the most informed, most, the best business decisions, to move forward.
No, agreed. And I think the lesson in the book is you still have to understand what you're doing, right? And you was trained on another submarine. So to some degree, you still have to train up, right?
Right. Oh, of course.
And I think that's always the challenge with executives, is they do grapple with that problem. Is well, hey, there's a reason why I have a CIO, CISO, because I don't know what I'm doing. Okay? And I think that's the biggest challenge is, how does a CEO deal with this? How does a CFO do a better job of, leading a team of people that are probably just as analytical as they are, and, to get a result. But and nevertheless, I digress. John, I know that you had some perspective as well on some emerging trends, but did we? I'm not sure if we asked that question. Did we?
Well, actually, hang on. I just got to say this. I mean, George, the reason I smirk on that one always is because, it reminds me of the movie version of that, which is called, I think, Down Periscope with Kelsey Grammer.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I've definitely seen that one.
He turns the whole ship around.
That's a throwback. Yeah.
Okay. So it always makes me laugh when I hear that one, because that makes me think that, well, the movie came out in like 1985 or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Anyways.
Yeah.
But I think we had another question for you.
Okay.
To kind of the emerging trends but we kind of talked about AI. So perhaps maybe a better question is, what do you think that the cyber disaster journey looks like for most of the executives?
Yeah. So it's
after a hack.
That's well, I'll say this: if you're still around afterwards, that's a good thing. And there is a tendency to want to change leadership and have a change of pace. When there is a catastrophic attack, but even for a small attack, when I first got out of the military, I had one of my supervisor's computers was ransomed. This was a non-DoD company that I was working for at the time, and he was in an airport, connected to some Wi-Fi, trying to get some work done, and it was just that machine and isolated, but it was a very stressful and emotional roller coaster of an experience, and that only goes up exponentially, as you look at, what of your networks, systems, data has been exposed. You have some shock and disbelief, I think, learning that you've been hacked. And you go through that, that kind of element of the grieving process, and trying to move forward and processing the information. Once the shock wears off, you're going to see some anger and some frustration, and depending on that level, that's, you may wind up having to look for a new role or new position. But you want to make sure that during those periods, you're actively working with the security team, actively working with any kind of outside organizations that may be helping you, to prevent or otherwise mitigate, the extent of the attack. There's definitely going to be a healthy amount of fear and anxieties that come out of this. It's the organization's reputation, it's the finances, it's its ongoing operations. Kidding a little bit around here, but for me, this certainly has a significant impact as we're supporting ongoing Department of Defense operations. So as a small business, if this were to happen, it would be very significant and could result in some fairly catastrophic consequences for the overseas service members, and we don't ever want that to happen. I think not necessarily as important, but certainly up there, especially if you want to continue your business. You've got your organization's reputation. That I think take precedence over some of the other potential impacts of finances and operations. If your reputation's tarnished, it's very hard to pick that up and keep moving. I think you go through a disclosure and remediation. Once your executive team has had a chance to kind of process that and identify, okay, this is what we're doing about it. You want to be as open and discussion as possible. It's a stressful, time-consuming process, and this is where if you don't have somebody on your team already who is forward-facing, and deals with things of media relations, especially depending on the severity of it or the size of your organization, you may want to consider bringing in some sort of consultant to talk about how you want to communicate honestly and ethically what's taken place within your organization. And then as this is all passed, you hope for being able to mitigate it to the point where you can recover and rebuild following remediation. So repairing the damage from the data breach, restoring the organization's reputation, and implementing new security measures. A lot of companies don't get that chance when things like this happen. It's a long and enduring process, and I think something that's really important, and I'll stress again, is communication with your employees and customers. It's essential that you communicate not only what you're doing in terms of remediation for the specific thing that's been attacked, but also what you're doing to minimize or remove the risk to their own personal security, and to help reduce the anxiety and confusion that's often associated with that. And then lastly, I've talked about this already, but being transparent with everyone who's involved, the extent, and if you're transparent from the beginning, that will be very helpful, especially during those initial phases of discovery, mitigation, and remediation. And then that will play itself out, as you're trying to rebuild, and recover and rebuild your reputation.
Really, we're talking about a disaster here.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
A digital disaster, so to speak. And so perhaps there is some recognition here in the sense that, this is a storm coming. Right? And I think this is the challenge where CEOs are like, okay, well, the IT team or the security team's got me, right? Mm-hmm. But I think in reality, the issue of responsibility versus accountability, and if we talk about the storm of digital hacks, perhaps this is like being a weatherman, right? Mm-hmm. Who has the weatherman's job, right? The weatherman is always responsible for telling you what's coming. Mm-hmm. When the storm hits, they're not necessarily accountable for the storm.
Right.
Because maybe it was a hurricane, right? And I think that's the challenge, is that, the weatherman does have accountability and responsibility in making sure leaders know the storm is coming. And I think that is really kind of the idea behind understanding all these acronyms and technical things. Yep. And so you have to listen to these teams and make sure that you understand at least the basics of the weather. And I think that's the challenge. Is we used to just have a satellite that forecasted the weather for us years ago. Mm-hmm. Right? Maybe some other things happening in the background, but accuracy was not that great. And over time, more tools and more functions to prepare us for those disasters. Well, here we are. We're in the cybersecurity world, or we're living in an internet-delivered world where hackers are always right next to the building, right? The worst part of the world digitally, so to speak, is always at your front door. So, and the weathermen, the security teams, and the IT teams are saying, a tornado is coming in our industry specifically. Mm-hmm. It's up to the executive team to also be aware of, hey, is my industry under attack?
Yep.
So that leadership, and going from leadership at the CEO level or CFO level, and it goes all the way up to the boardroom as well, mm-hmm. Is focused on risk and ways to utilize what essentially these storms to notify people and communicate with them. Hey, board up your windows. There's a hurricane coming, right? And so the team will tell you, your technical teams, hey, listen, the forecast isn't so good. And the executive then has to make a decision on, okay, what am I going to do here? And it's never easy. Mm-hmm. And if they don't get it right, and they kind of go, no, these storms always blow over, and then wham, right? And then you're in the situation that you described, which, the storm is here. I need to do this. I need to, calm down, relax.
Yep. Exactly. Well, and the thing, what I wanted to do there and kind of talking, George, is there's really, you look at a mild storm, which is just that one machine that's been compromised, and that can be dealt with. And, maybe that executive, that mid-level executive gets training, and, you can move about your day, and then, but then you have those catastrophic exposures. And I think, to take to your point about talking to your team and communicating with them, I think it's incumbent on the CEO and maybe even the boardroom to not only talk and engage, but to create space for your senior executives to engage with them, so that they can actually hear the forecast. And that needs to become a part of your meeting cadences. I'm sure, we're not the only organization that's out there that has, meetings twice a week with our headquarters. I'm sure other businesses do this all the time. And what you want to do, in my opinion, is that you want to create that space, so that you can have that awareness, not just with you as the CEO or the president or whomever, but with your entire executive team.
Absolutely. Clarence, our next question is going to be more around you, right? So, I mean, how does somebody become Clarence Dingman and the CEO of PingWind and all these great things that you've done? I mean, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, yeah, sure. So first off, just a minor correction. So my role is as a president of Exeter, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of PingWind. And I joined the PingWind team back in November of this past year, and I'll get to that here in just a second. So professionally, started out did my undergrad in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, at a school called Dickinson College, and was commissioned in the Army as a lieutenant in the infantry, and then later became a special forces officer, and actually met my wife. Today's our 19th wedding anniversary. So thank you. And it's several deployments to the Middle East. I was when I was active duty, I was 2003 through 2014. And then, in transitioning from the military, I had initially gone, completely away from DoD and government work for about a year. So this was in, kind of commercial property management. It was very insightful. It's where I first, saw the impact of like what an actual business threat is and ransomware is on a cybersecurity attack. In DoD, it was always this kind of when I was active duty, it was always this kind of abstract concept and very much, focused on those kind of catastrophic impacts, but you never stop to think about, well, what if it's just one machine trying to get a couple thousand, and it's, very, very contained. So that was kind of my first exposure to, cybersecurity. And, over the course of a year, I found that, I really wanted to get back to some of the work that I was doing when I was active duty. So I started to get into DoD contracting. I worked with a number of different, leveraged my network, found an employer I was with for, about a total of about 7 consolidated years. Started out as a project manager, worked my way up to a program manager position, and then, got more involved kind of in the operations and the business development piece. So, kind of one success after another led to, a good bit of progression. I was approached, the company that I was with was services based, and I was approached by a products based company, to support them in their business venture. And, it was an interesting year with that company. That they make great products, but yeah, it was not a good fit, I don't think, on either side. And I was kind of looking at a number of different offers, and I'd left that previous company on good terms, and they asked me to return. It was a good arrangement for both, and I stayed for about another 4 years with them until very recently, last summer. The CEO of PingWind and I were platoon leaders together in Iraq in 2005, 2006. And he had approached me and said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to, we're getting ready to make this acquisition of Exeter Information Technologies. Do you want to come over and support that?" I said, "Absolutely." So here I am, just about a year later. About 8.5 months later. And we've come through that acquisition. Our mantra going into it was don't break anything, and we've definitely succeeded there. Now it's doing some exciting work, building as a team. With PingWind. Prior to the acquisition, they were IT services focused, much like Exeter is, but they were on the federal civilian side, so doing a lot of work with the VA and CDC and DHS. When I say like IT services, you're looking at tier 1 through 4 help desk support, systems and database administration, software development. I would say to a certain extent, DevSecOps, and with a big capital C on cybersecurity. And there's a good bit of overlap between what our acquired entity and what I lead up does, and what PingWind was doing. So it's a really good synergy between the two organizations.
Excellent. Well, and I understand that. I mean, so outside of work, I mean, you're a scoutmaster.
Yeah. So
got some.
I'm really passionate about that, and So I had the opportunity to get involved in my first my son's Cub Scout, and then where my locality was one of the first areas to stand up a girls troop within Scouts BSA. So I was an assistant scoutmaster with my daughter as well as with my son for about 2 years, and then things kind of developed so that I took over as a scoutmaster for my daughter's troop this past summer. It's great because there's both brother and sister troops, so they do separate activities most of the time, but during the summer, most years they have gone to the same camp, which for parents is actually like super convenient. It's very helpful because you only have 1 week where your child or children are off versus trying to plan summer activities around that. So we had summer camp very recently, and spent some time out in Southern Virginia with both my daughter and my son, and it was a lot of fun.
Excellent. Well, so here's one of the questions we'd like to ask is, if you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would that be?
I looked at this question before the podcast because I was kind of, I'd been thinking to myself for probably about a week and a half here of how I wanted to say this. So I'm going to do my best. If you invest early in the best version of yourself, I think would be the biggest advice, and that's not just who you are professionally. That's self-care, it's family, it's faith, it's fitness and finances. If you invest in yourself and take that time, I know it may feel selfish, and friends, I'm sorry. And it may feel selfish, but, you're going to have, exponential results on the other end. And it took me a very long time, to realize that. But as I've progressed throughout my career, that has certainly become more of a focus of mine. And as it has, I seem to have been able to understand human interaction better. I've been able to, understand business better because of it.
I think you might have a book there, the 5 F's or something. So, all right, for our final question, we'd like to leave our audience with some sort of an action item. So what's one piece of advice or a tip that you would give to the audience about reducing their regulatory cyber risk, or what's the biggest thing that they can do?
I think it's threefold, right? So, you've got kind of a diverse audience that's going to be listening to this. So I think the first thing is stay informed. Everybody can do that. Threats and regulatory guidance are always maturing and adapting, as are solutions and platforms. It's critical, that you, regardless of your role, contribute to that understanding, and provide, to go back to that earlier point, provide the space for that information to get exchanged. That goes hand in hand with training. It might sound trite for your employees to click through trainings on cybersecurity, but when you become complacent, especially as we're trying to grow skill sets within our own workforce, things like data protection, data handling, phishing attempts, and incident reporting procedures become increasingly important. And what you don't want to have happen is, your employee receives, a weird email with a weird link, and they don't know how to report it. And then that, their ignorance of reporting it is not on that employee. It's on you as the team leader. It's on you as ultimately as the president or the CEO. And then I think, lastly, check yourself, conducting periodic audits and assessments on your own cyber hygiene and your own cyber program, internal assessments, maybe having another organization externally, setting up, again, creating that space for discovery, through, setting up penetration test events, are all things you could do, I think, to reduce cyber risk to yourself as well as to your organization.
I mean, that's probably some of the best advice that we've gotten so far on the show. So I definitely appreciate that, and I hope our audience listens to that and takes that to heart, and then shares it out with the other people that might need to hear that. So, Clarence, we appreciate your time with this, and thank you for your insight on this. And it's been very wonderful to talk about the cyber risk and your company and everything that's happening, and looking forward to that future and the cyber risk and cybersecurity.
Us as well.
Thank you. So to our audience, thank you for listening. If you've learned something today, laughed, or, played with Down's Periscope, whatever, please tell someone about this podcast, or share the book that George that talked about. And there it is. That's been another great episode of Navigating Cyber Risks with your hosts, John Riley and George Usi. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Clarence.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks, y'all.
This was another amazing episode of Navigating Cyber Risk, powered by Omnistruct. Show us some love by subscribing and sharing today. Reach out to us with any comments, questions, or ideas about future shows by emailing us at podcast@omnistruct.com. Until next time, remember, governance is not a technology.